Hello, hello, hello. Seems to be working. Hey, everyone. Hopefully people start to trickle in. Thanks for hanging with us. End of day 2. So we have 2 agenda items left. First, we have a talk from Artem, and he'll be talking about maximum viable security. He's an investment partner at Cyberfund. And then we'll have, to kind of conclude the day, we'll have a slightly fun rotating panel. It'll be based on John Charb's recent post about kind of the end game for Ethereum and Ethereum roadmap items generally. So we'll have kind of 15 minutes of a fixed panel, and then people can rotate in if they have stuff they want to ask or if they have stuff they want to say. So hopefully that'll be kind of a nice way to round out the day. One quick announcement, there was 2 technology items that were lost. One was a small iPhone, one is a battery pack. So if either of those are yours, come let us know and we'll get those back to you. So yeah, without further ado, let's welcome Artem to the stage.
Hello. Yep. Thank you so much for the introduction. Okay, maybe hello. Hi. Yeah, I'm just gonna use this one. Yeah, a few words about myself. My name's Artem. I have background in pure mathematics, studied geometry and topology, was interested in crypto since 2016, and actually really dove deep into it via Tim's course on foundations of blockchain, so it's particularly exciting to present here. Yeah, and then around, let's say, 1.5 years ago, I joined Cyberfund and doing research and investing there. Today I'm going to talk about maximal viable security, and it's a framework for how to think about Ethereum issuance. So I'm going to talk a lot about this, and it's a work in collaboration with ADCV, Danny McNutt, and Sonia Kim from Stakehouse. Let me mention that another focus of this talk is going to be on, let's say, structure of staking economy. So one is a high-level framework, another one is a very low-level, how the staking economy is structured. So let's jump right into it. Yeah, quick disclaimer, Cyberfund holds ETH, LDO, and is investor in P2P. So what are we trying to do? Just to set the stage, well, the goal is to develop a stable, sustainable issuance policy for Ethereum. There's various ways to think about it. For me, it's the easiest is these 4 steps. Basically, first you want to have a guiding framework, and second, you need to collect the data, just what's going on right now. Third is, analyze scenarios individually, what happens if we do that, what happens if we do this, and then compare these scenarios relatively to each other. So let's talk about this framework, because it's not even clear why we need a framework. And in my opinion, it's something that we actually skip in our conversation a lot. And interestingly, John's recent post, which we're going to discuss after this talk, is very much in a very similar spirit. So 2 reasons why we need it. And first is that it's because this topic is really complex and also contentious. There's a lot of different opinions. So we really need a framework in order to be able to come to a rough consensus and push into a unified direction. So how do we come up with a framework? And you can think of a framework as a North Star. Framework is a little more than North Star, but it's basically the same thing. So how can we develop a framework, and what should be the framework about? And I think we need to spend some time discussing this. I singled out 3, let's say, entities about which people think a lot when they analyze issuance. One is network, another is asset, and another is stakers. Network is obviously Ethereum, asset is ETH. And which one should we optimize for? In my opinion, MVI and some other suggestions like cap and stake are focused largely on asset, kind of focused on minimizing issuance of that asset. Whereas, in my opinion, network is more important because the relationship between network and asset is dual. Of course, there's value from one to another and backwards, but the relationship from network to asset is the more important one. So in my opinion, we need to first prioritize considerations about network. Of course, we cannot forget about anything, asset and other things, but the network should be the priority. And then also about the stakers, this one is also, I feel like it's an important thing to clarify. We love stakers, but there's a reason why we love them, and the reason is because they provide security for the network. So the network is the primary concern, the stakers are the secondary concern, and that's why, for example, considerations about nominal versus real yield, I'm not sure if they're very relevant because they only point towards network's benefit at the cost of stakers, which is exactly what we're trying to do. So that delineation is also important, in my opinion. And then, what should be the actual framework we focus on the networks? We suggest in our paper that it should be an evaluation from the perspective of the biggest value proposition of the network, which is security and neutrality. I mean, one can argue about value propositions, but let's say the value proposition coming from staking is almost undoubtedly security and neutrality. And so with that in mind, with that framework in mind, we need to analyze a little bit security model of Ethereum. And there's many attacks. I singled out three. One is the 34% double sign-in attack. And the interesting thing about this is that the protocol can detect it. It's seen by protocol. Head to Barnaby for great post on seen by the protocol. And then B and C are much trickier attacks. One is the censoring attack, 51%, and another one is this coercion by state actors on validator nodes, on the large ones. And these are not seen by Ethereum. There's no way to programmatically detect it. And there's also this term Ethereum's autonomy. And Ethereum's autonomy refers to ability to resist attacks B and C. And I think we need to really remember about it, about these attacks, and have them in mind when we design the security model. So what are the defenses against them? Against A, there's obviously cryptographic slashing. But against A and B, there's two main ones. One is social slashing, and another one is decentralization coming from distributed validator set. And if we evaluate them a little bit, we sort of realize that social slashing is complicated. It's complicated on the political, from the political angle, but also it's complicated to automate. So while some chains decide to lean into it, like Solana, I'm not sure that's the right path for Ethereum. So, and on the other hand, the decentralization coming from distributed validator set is Ethereum's biggest differentiator from the staking viewpoint. And it is key to neutrality that Ethereum has. And it is also a preventive measure, which is another very good property. So I think that's a property that we would love to preserve when designing staking protocol. And so the upshot of our framework is this maximum viable security idea that that's what we need to not lose, and it largely comes from geographically distributed disconnected validators. And to compare it and contrast with MVI, MVS maximizes security without compromising scarcity, and MVI is vice versa. It tries to minimize issuance without compromising security. And from the, let's say, from the maybe business perspective, MVS sort of prioritizes expansion and sustainability of our security, whereas MVI is all about efficiency, not overpaying for it. Okay, so that's those were the slides about the framework. And now, if you remember, the second step in my little roadmap was about data collection. And data collection, in my mind, there's a lot, of course, to collect. But one thing that I wanted to highlight is the current state of the staking market. So there's at the top here, I included various types of stakers, solo stakers, on-chain people, techies, I call them techies, institutions, retail, and then also ETFs. ETFs are with punctured arrow because they're not really staking right now, but they already acquired one of the staking providers, so we know they're coming. And then in the middle, there's centralized exchanges, centralized staking providers, LST and LRT pools. These are the, let's say, platforms through which some of the people stake. These are the delegation platforms. So first thing to observe, solo stakers, those who stake directly, it's only 10% of the market. And then LST and LRT pools have 40% of the market. Centralized staking providers like P2P, Kiln, Figment, they have 25%, and centralized exchanges have 25%. And I singled out sort of the biggest players there. Another comment is, centralized exchanges and centralized staking providers, these are classical delegation businesses where they just take stake and then, they stake on your behalf and you pay them some sort of fee. Just, not really complicated business model, but they have very different fees, as you can observe. So centralized exchanges may have typically have 25% fee. For example, Coinbase has 15% of the market, and they have that fee on the retail side. And then centralized staking providers, it varies, but it varies from 1 to 5% fee. So it's very different numbers there. In centralized exchanges, stakers, those are retails and also institutions, it just so happens that basically Coinbase and Binance, they capture most of the market there, and it's not very competitive. It's a duopoly. There's some others, but it's not very competitive, and as a result, it's very concentrated with Coinbase and Binance. On the other hand, in centralized staking providers, there's actually a lot of them, and there's a very fierce, I would say, competition between them. So it's a very competitive market. Probably that's the reason why the fees from 1 to 5% are so low there. And as a result, because it's a very competitive market, we see that it's also decentralized. And then let's talk about LST and LRT pools. So important thing to realize that these pools, they don't stake ETH by themselves. What they do is they distribute ETH among others in a uniform fashion, and by this they bring decentralization to the network. And so in particular they distribute to centralized staking providers. For example, Lido's main router distributes among 40 of those uniformly. And they also distribute among solo stakers, like, for example, Rocket Pool does, or Community Staking Module of Lido does. And because it distributes the stake uniformly, it actually contributes a lot to decentralization. So that's kind of the structure of the market, and it's in my mind, it's very important to keep this in mind when analyzing the potential impact of change on issuance. So let's observe something, some interesting points here. And in my mind, the most interesting and the most important point here is that actually the market is segmented. The market is segmented between off-chain staking and on-chain. Well, of course, all staking is on-chain, but the point is on centralized exchanges, people don't interact with blockchains. They interact with the user interface of centralized exchange. And everywhere else, in centralized staking providers, LSTs, LRTs, solo stakers, everywhere else, people actually interact with blockchains. And its segmentation, it's not based on this observation. The segmentation is based on the observation about fees, because the customers of exchanges are happy to pay very high fees, and customers which are of centralized staking providers, pools, and also solo stakers don't even pay any fees. They pay much lower fees, and just because we can observe this fee discrepancy, we see that this market is not in these two segments of the market are not in a direct competition between each other. And this observation, I feel like, is really important, because a lot of the arguments come from initially stem from the idea that margins will compress either way. But in segmented market, I don't think margins compress either way. They could compress, but they could also not compress. We could see centralized exchanges with their very inelastic customer base. From the economics viewpoint, their Nash equilibrium is to never lower their fees, and instead actually charge higher fees from their inelastic customer base, and never compete with the on-chain market segment. So, I also want to highlight that we kind of observe this in other markets. So if we think about investments, there's sophisticated ways to do investments, like LP in different funds, doing it by yourself, like solo investing and things like this. But there's also this passive way where you just kind of throw your money in some kind of pension fund, in 401k, and et cetera. And even though there's no fees showed to you, like one can argue that there's so many intermediaries along the way that segment of the investment market where you passively invest is a different segment with higher fees. And I feel like it sort of mirrors what we have in staking, because sort of the same customer base is with centralized exchanges. And they feel like staking is a passive thing that they do. They don't think about Ethereum. It's a passive investment on the centralized exchange. Okay, so let's dive a little bit into the actual impact on all stakers and delegating platforms. So let's talk about solo stakers first. So they have high costs, and because they don't have economies of scale, and they also have actually opportunity costs. So they are on chain, they are sophisticated, so they have options to do other than staking. So as a result, if the issuance is cut, there's no way around it. Some of them will churn. Now the question is, okay, with what rate they will churn? What's the elasticity? Well, one can argue, and I think that's probably true, that actually they will churn at a slower rate at first than, let's say, on-chain techies, which delegate to pools. And the reason is because the solo stakers have really diverse costs. Like some of them have these costs, some others have other costs. They have really different setups. So their supply curve is really probably steeper than supply curves of techies. However, in our paper, we did an analysis of their cost structures, and they have pretty high fixed costs. And as a result, if you project the behavior of solo stakers further down the line, so long term, they actually can churn at a higher rate. So their supply curve is steep at first, but then it's actually very close to horizontal. So it's quite dangerous, in my mind, to dismiss this fact that they have high fixed costs and they're inflexible, essentially, to change it. So yeah, the effect is kind of dual of cut issuance on this, and some other work from our grants also confirms this. Yeah, so that's what I. Those are the bullet points, and then the important part at the bottom is that we love solo stakers because they bring most decentralization. However, from the market perspective, staking they basically comprise only 10% of the market, and most staking works through delegation. That's just the preference of the customer, of the capital. And so as much as I don't like it, the reality is that the delegated stake market is more important, and so therefore the impact of issuance cut actually is more important on the delegated stake market. So let's analyze that, or let's try to analyze that because it's super complex. So let's start from stakers at the top. Well, those who are on chain, so those who stake with centralized staking providers and with pools, these are parts of the institutions and also on chain techies. They are sophisticated. It's clear that they're on chain, they're operating their wallets, and so they have opportunity cost. They have lending markets, they have stuff to do with their ETH, so they will churn. However, the customers of centralized exchanges, they don't have the same opportunities as on-chain actors, and so they will actually largely don't churn, likely to largely not churn. And the fees that they pay is the reason why we can claim that. So that's the effect on the staking on the stakers. Now on the delegating platforms, it's a little different. So on the centralized exchanges, first they largely preserve their customers, and they have low costs, so they just continue operating. They actually they almost don't feel the cut. Of course, the revenue coming from staking will decrease. However, most of the revenues of centralized exchanges, we can read their public statements, doesn't come from staking, so they'll just continue the operations. Centralized staking providers, on the other hand, will lose customers coming from on-chain, but they actually can maintain margins, and that's one of contributions of our paper. We show how they can restructure the costs in order to maintain margins and continue their operations. Of course, I mean, they will have less business, but they will continue the operations. And then what's the effect on the pools? Well, the pools have very high costs, and the high costs are, the way to understand them is basically they distribute the stake uniformly among node operators, and basically, for example, Lido in totality has about 300 operators, and each of them pays costs. So that's why it has high costs. As a result of the issuance cut, some of those node operators will drop, and the result is that the pools, EtherFi, Lido, Rocket Pool, will just distribute among smaller number of nodes, which means less decentralization. So that's the impact on the staking economy, an analysis basically on it. And let me make an upshot. Centralized exchange market segment largely untouched. Decentralized market segment, the on-chain one, these comprise of LRTs, LSTs, and CSPs, centralized staking providers. The reason why centralized staking providers is in the decentralized pocket is because it's a very competitive market, so there's a lot of companies competing there. So they feel the pressure, and some stakers and some CSPs leave. And as a result, centralized exchange market share grows, and as a result, there's going to be less decentralization, which potentially could undermine security. And in our paper, we make a very concrete model where we take let's say an aggressive stake cap scenario where, like in totality, there's about 120 million ETH. Let's say the stake cap is implemented such that there cannot be more than 40 million ETH staked. In that world, we show that Coinbase can reach in a pretty straightforward fashion 34% of the network. And the reason, the main reason is the unstaked reserves that Coinbase has, which they don't report actually how much of that is moving to staking, and also the ETF's assets that are largely custodied by Coinbase. Okay, so now I want to also maybe apply the framework of MVS to some of the arguments that that were presented by other researchers. So this one I already mentioned, this real versus nominal yield. Yeah, I'm sorry about this MVS. My slide is a little off. Real versus nominal yield. While mathematically it's a beautiful construction, and I agree that, for example, it's important to keep it in mind. I feel like that phenomenon strictly benefits network and doesn't benefit stakers, which in from Ethereum's viewpoint is exactly what Ethereum does. It sort of takes value from stakers. So I don't think, I'm not sure if it's a relevant consideration. Also, by the way, there's a cantillon effect as well. So there's an argument from that side that nominal yield is more important. The other argument is that the current issuance is costly. This is the main argument of MVI framework. And we did an analysis of exactly how much could be saved. Actually, Anders also made that analysis. Like, it's basically an integral undersupply curve from certain staking ratio to another staking ratio, and it checks out to be single billions per year. And if you think about the liquidity that the ETH has, it's a pretty small price, given that Ethereum actually buys security assurance in return. And security assurance, by the way, also bolsters ETH value in its own right. So we feel that it's unjustified, the cost, sort of the cost benefit is unjustified. And then there's an argument of boosting monetary hardness of ETH. Here, the main reason why let's say I personally, I'm not sure if that's the right way to go, is because it feels like ETH's moneyness, it may to some extent come from the fact that it's not inflating, like some of the other, like fiat, for example, currencies, right? But actually, like the actual value of ETH mostly comes from the network, from the product market fit that Ethereum has. And so if we undermine security, ETH's moneyness may actually decrease rather than increase. But also there's other considerations, like Bitcoin is a strong contender there, and the third one is the same what I said. Basically, if we lean into security and neutrality, ETH's value actually might be best bolstered this way. Another way to think about this is, if we increase the fees that Ethereum generates, we can increase the burn, and that's the way to kind of increase moneyness of ETH, not to reduce issuance at the cost of security. All right, and this one is the relative analysis part. So probably this is the part where almost no work has been done. Let me say that there's two arguments that are MVS aligned, that are security, that are concerned with security. One is LST dominance, and this is the argument for why issuance cut could be beneficial. And there's a couple of counter arguments there. Basically, one is that there's this word dominance, but actually in the last half a year we see that the market is pretty competitive there, and the share of the leader actually decreases of Lido from 33 to 28%. And then another one is, it's actually on the smart contract layer, so everything is very transparent and can be mitigated. And there's this concept of dual governance that Lido is pushing forward, which mitigates most of the governance concerns. And I recently learned that this dual governance mechanism is being formally verified, so we'll have really strong assurances there. And then another MVS-aligned argument against the cut is the centralized exchange state concentration. This is what I have been talking about for some time already. Coinbase getting to 33% share issue is very real. And so on balance, Yeah, I mean, let me mention that actually security is unlikely to be threatened even if one centralized exchange passes certain threshold, basically because of social slashing and also reputation of centralized exchanges. However, the neutrality, the perceived neutrality of Ethereum will definitely be in danger. And so on balance, it seems to better aggregate staked ETH on the transparent smart contract layer that boosts decentralization rather than on the opaque TradFi layer that sort of undermines neutrality. And yeah, let me just shout out Mike for his great paper on LST dominance risks, and that we need a lot more analysis. So some closing thoughts. Basically, we have lots to do on all these four steps. Let me mention that we at Cyberfund gave out several grants to dive deeper in many of the points that I mentioned, and so watch out for our announcements of the reports from our grants. And yeah, so let me close on just the call. Let's collaborate. Let's dive deep into the arguments. Also, maybe there's some economists in this room that didn't know that there is such a huge sort of open problem exists. So if you get interested, reach out. Would love you to get involved. And yeah, and the last quote I want to say: "Let's accelerate what we want fiercely. It's an infinite game. There's no end game." Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So you pointed out that in the presence of issuance, the centralized staking providers would survive because of their flexible operating costs, but then kind of argued that LSTs would drop off because they don't share the same flexible operating costs. But isn't it true that in these protocols like Lido, it's usually the same operators they're both centralized staking providers like P2P, Kiln, et cetera, but they're also operating within Lido, and they're able to amortize these costs across all of this uniform stake that they're receiving?
Yeah, let me clarify, yes. So you are right. So indeed, so the centralized staking providers are they have flexible costs, so they will probably survive. LSTs will also survive. It's just the the amount of node operators among which they distribute the stake will decrease. The parties that may not survive are solo stakers. So the solo stakers have very inflexible cost structure, and that's what we show in our paper. So yeah, basically, sorry, maybe I misspoke, but basically, solo stakers may not survive. CSPs probably will survive, but some will churn, and then on the pool side, they will survive, but they're the decentralization that they bring to the network will be diminished because the node operators among which they distribute will churn. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hey, super interesting topic. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned a couple of times that social slashing is perhaps ineffective or something along those lines. I think super slashing is pretty flexible. There's a lot of things that may not be possible or just maybe hard to just punish for on-chain. Can you summarize, it's certainly cheaper to do it also social slashing, Can you maybe summarize the pros and cons of social slashing? And has there been any data maybe for or against social slashing? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the cool benefit of social slashing is that it's super flexible, right? So it's, you can do anything, and also this is one of the major improvements in proof of stake protocols is an attack actually punishable? Like in proof of work, it's not, but in proof of stake, when you hard fork, you can actually slash the attacker. So social slash is super powerful. However, it's a very, it's not a preventive measure. It's a punishing measure, which comes afterwards. And so as a result, you can sort of have looming threats, meaning that some entities can have large stakes, etc., but they don't attack because they have this punishment. But there's a possibility, right? And this is just a different setup from a setup where you know that no entity has the power. You see, it's the difference between no entity having like outsized power versus entities having outsized power, but they know that they cannot attack because of social slashing. I think there's actually quite a big gap between the two, and that's why I sort of advocate for preventive measures, meaning decentralized validator set.
Thanks.
Hey, so yeah, I guess just one of the points that you made that sort of resonated, and it sort of resonated because I got into a bit of a, not a scrap or anything, but like talking to the guys who wrote the succinct prover network paper this week, and there seems to be like an inherent property here where we just need to pay some like redundancy cost as a network of people to ensure some sort of decentralization in the prover network or the staker, the validator set. So I'm wondering, is there, maybe this isn't a question just for you, but for everybody, is there like a property where like we can have some relative costs for each of the people in the system, and then the quality of decentralization that we want to receive from the network? Because it feels like it's pretty important to like have a concrete number for this.
Yeah, I agree. It's super important, and yeah, this is one of the most important key questions. Yeah, I don't have a good answer other than totally agree it's very important. I mean, maybe let me just highlight the fact that, from an economics viewpoint, if you think about these markets as very uniform markets, unsegmented, everyone competes with everyone, it's sort of almost hopeless to think the decentralization will be preserved, because the centralized solutions will always be more efficient. And if we, in capitalistic world, we strive for efficiency, eventually, sort of mathematically, the proof is that we'll get to a centralized market. However, I made an argument that our market is not uniform. It's not efficient, essentially. That there are people who are willing to pay pretty large fees, and the Nash equilibrium may actually be that, for some actors to capture the customer base who is happy to pay large fees, get a lot of fees from those, and not compete with the actors that are happy to pay for decentralization. And that's a potential practical way to sustain decentralization, at least for, let's say, decades. I'm not sure if it's like let's say, centuries worth of a plan, but at least for 1 or 2 decades, it feels like we could sustain decentralization. But I 100% agree we need to think like from first principles, what's a sustainable way to keep this market decentralized? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the good thing with the validator network is that we have a specific target, like you mentioned at the start of your presentation, where like 34% seems to be the cutoff. So like given 34% and a certain amount of different players in the game, how much redundancy do we need to pay through issuance to make sure that we keep that number? But yeah, anyway, thanks for the talk.
Totally.
Yeah, we can do one more question, Peter.
Thanks. I was wondering if you could kind of expand a bit on how economically relevant you think these costs are, because the costs of running a node are fixed, right? Maybe it's $100 a month, but you could stake however much you want in one node. So I agree that generally, if the fixed costs were very high, you'd see kind of one central node, but that doesn't seem to be the case, at least compared to the size of the staking market.
Yeah, I was of the same impression when I just started researching this topic, but after spending some time with node operators and with Stakehouse folks with whom I co-authored the paper, it became clear that it's just not the case. Like with the, the larger is your deposit size, actually your setup needs to be different. And there's a lot of kind of costs involved there. And I encourage just to look at our paper. It's the same name, Maximal Viable Security, and we have a whole section where we study the costs of node operators and costs of solo stakers. Yeah, these are just happen to be more complicated than they intuitively feel like.
Thank you.
All right, let's thank Artem once more.
Thank you.
Cool. So, right, as promised, we'll kind of wrap up with a panel here. So if we could get John, Donkrad, and Justin on stage. Yeah, I have a slide that I wanted to put up, if you can switch to that, Brian. Right. So, yeah, John recently wrote an article. If you're on crypto Twitter, you probably saw it. He published it earlier this week, and it's called Ethereum's North Star. This is kind of like summarization of the article in one Venn diagram. And I guess the kind of setup for this panel is that a lot of the tweets from John's article are actually Donkrad's, and I think Justin's reaction was maybe slightly different than Donkrad's, so we can kind of start by maybe John presenting the high-level synopsis of the article. Donkrad and Justin can each give their perspective, and then we'll kind of have them go back and forth for a while. And then after some time has elapsed, people can join them on stage, ask questions at the mics here. Hopefully it's kind of a fun and lively way to end out CCE. So yeah, good to go.